on the very long list of counter tariffs being considered was on books. So this is a really outsized effect on Canada. Like Canadian indie bookstores were losing their minds because so many books come from the US. And if Canadian indie bookstores had to pay 25% blanket, we're talking like businesses going under, like it wouldn't be able to happen. So there was a huge coming together in Canada to fight that. But also there's the ideological aspect of we want a free flow of information. This is what democracies rest on. We have an opportunity to say, no, we want to know what Americans are saying. We want a free flow of information to come to us so that we can make informed decisions, so we can learn critically.
Well, Canadians, please hear us, and maybe you can even agree with me, Kim. Most Americans are smarter and more skilled at our jobs than our president. Just like, please bear that in mind when you're deciding whether or not to buy American.
Hi, I'm Joe Beal, the founder and CEO of Microcosm Publishing. I'm also the author of A People's Guide to Publishing, which distills what I've learned from selling millions of books over the past 28 years.
I'm Ellie Blue, the Vice President of Microcosm. We started this podcast to share what we've learned with newer publishers, so you can learn from our mistakes. Or maybe you just want to learn about the publishing industry.
This week, we welcome Kim Werker of 910 Publications to teach us all about, cross-border relations with North American countries that used to be super duper friendly, and then some things happened. We haven't really been following the news, but we're excited to find out what we've been missing for the last 6 months, as well as the nature of the T word, tariffs. Kim, can you tell us your superhero backstory in publishing and how you came to where you are now?
Oh, I've never been asked for the superhero version, which is very exciting to me. So Sorry?
The supervillain version would also work.
I mean, I wish. I've tried so hard to be a supervillain and find that I'm just like, I'm just chaotic good, and there's nothing I just can't help it. So my career in publishing started on a whim on a very rainy Vancouver February morning in 2004 when I got very, very upset and wrote a screed about crochet on the internet, which I think is an unusual way to get into publishing, but it was the time of, I'm sure you recall, like the nascent sort of social web was really burgeoning at that time. Knitters were among one of the first really niche communities to emerge through blog comments and stuff like that. And crochet was like nothing. And so I got very upset about this because I kept looking to try to find crochet, like, online magazines and blogs and all this kind of stuff. And it was a right place at the right time kind of thing. I didn't know much about crochet at the time, but I ended up starting what became an online magazine about crochet. At a time when there weren't many crocheters online. So it was a right place, right time thing. I might not have been an expert in crochet at the time, but I could write and make a website, and then eventually wrote 6 crochet books, and then was the editor of Interweave Crochet magazine. Like, I built a career on this, but what I loved the most about it was all of the people who started their careers around the same time. So we never got paid for that. That was not a money-making endeavor, but we all built careers on it. And what I discovered through all of that was that more than the craft itself, don't tell anyone, what I loved was editing a magazine. What I loved was writing books. And by virtue of moving into print magazine making, I learned about how books were made as well. And then worked in editorial freelance. After I found I had said everything I possibly needed to say about crochet, I moved on from there and I worked freelance as an editor, both on books, kind of formally for craft industry publishers, and then also freelance for self-publishers. And in the spring of 2020, when everything was disrupted, so was my entire freelance career. And in a kind of fever dream, I emailed some people like, we got nothing left to lose. Let's see if we can just start our own press. And to your point, Joe, about sort of cross-border things, what I learned in that process is that the reason there weren't so many niche publishers in Canada is, there is no one reason. There's a wide variety of reasons, but there was no craft publisher in Canada. So all authors I knew were working for a wide variety of American publishers to write their books. And I didn't know if that's because it's just completely non-viable to have a niche publishing company in Canada, or if it just had never been done. So I was like, I got nothing left to lose. And 910 was born with my then business partner, Kate Atherley, who is like a knitting author and instructor out of Toronto. So that is, I don't know if we could call it a superhero story, but it is the story I've got.
I love that. So what is it like to run a niche publisher in Canada? Like, is it viable?
I mean, I've never done it anywhere else, so I can't really say. Is it viable for me quite yet? No, I won't lie. I'm not getting paid yet, which unfortunately I think is expected for any kind of startup in any industry that we have. I have very deliberately, I mean, nobody wants to invest in a publishing company anyway, so it's not like I've been like batting investors away. But I managed until quite recently to run the company not in debt, which was quite nice. Now I'm a bit in debt, which is manageable, not quite nice, does not bode well for me getting paid this year. But I am confident and determined that I will get over that hump and make it work. And part of the reason I think it'll work is that I'm finally in a stage where I'm meeting people, other publishers in Canada, publishers in the US like you, actually being able to form a meaningful and supportive network, which is something I always had coming up through crafts, but never, it's very hard in Canada to do that. The trade organizations don't really welcome new presses, so it's very hard to meet people. Anyway, I'm optimistic. Whether that's realistic or not is only time will tell.
Right. I mean, I guess investors, feel free to get in touch with Kim, like throw some money around, maybe take her out, show her what your worth is. But I have seen a lot of Canadian niche publishers in other genres, mind you, but make it, like Thornapple would be a great example. Like, they could not be more niche, and they dominate their niche, and they dominate it worldwide. And I feel like that is real. I mean, it's really inspiring to me to see that, because that was sort of what we didn't really set out. We jokingly set out to do that. And then we were kind of like, oh, we're a lot more successful than we thought possible. And so it's, is like good and bad, but I like that you took that approach in the, you're like, well, I did a blog and I didn't make money from that. So like, this has to be better than that.
Well, it's true. I mean, but I did. I mean, I made a career out of that. I did end up getting paid out of that. And so did so many people. Like, there are people now whose career is crochet, like where I published their very first pattern and none of us got paid, right? So it was like I got paid work through that. I was very much an evangelist of that kind of work at the time. 20 years ago, you could have this side gig that was a passion project, and it was fine that it didn't make any money, because you then kind of springboarded from there into work that made you money. And so I learned a lot about myself and how I like to do business through all of that. I loved getting calls from like established industry people, like, we need a technical editor. Who do you got? And thus a technical editor who had been volunteering for me got paid work. So, that kind of thing. I found myself in the like deepest depths of COVID, starting this company with my business partner, who is a profound introvert, being like, I'm like dying for like a networking meeting. I don't know what's wrong with me, but like I'm like withering on the inside. I've got no one to talk to. So thankfully now I have people to talk to. Thank you for this conversation. Tell me to stop at any time.
No. Well, so you have mentioned before that especially for an extrovert such as yourself, like the Canadian publishing industry is not necessarily super welcoming. It's hard to connect with people. Can you tell us a little bit about that landscape? I don't think most people in the US are hyper aware of differences between the US and Canada, except what they've seen in Michael Moore's movies. So please tell us about while you sit there in your house with the unlocked door, please tell us about the Canadian publishing industry.
No need to brag on that.
Really funny.
But I
It's
would
really
like to
funny.
interject that I always say it's easier for a Canadian press to publish a Canadian poet in Canada than it is for them to publish a book that like the market actually wants.
Is this true?
That is absolutely true. So
No.
I will
I mean-
start with an anecdote. Not long. So we funded our first major release. Like we did like a test book when we were like, oh wow, this is gonna fly. We ran a Kickstarter for our first book. It funded in 2 days. We were very surprised by this. And so I printed, I'm working on our 4th campaign that'll launch hopefully next month. I know you're approaching your 100th. By the way, Oriana Leckert says hello. I had a call with her last week.
Hi, Ariana, if you're watching.
She was
She-
delighted that we were speaking.
Yes.
She's
She's
fantastic.
a big fan of yours.
Oh.
Likewise. Well, yeah, if you're watching this and you're running a Kickstarter project, you will probably interact with Oriana.
Or you should.
That's right. Seek her out. And so so the Kickstarter had funded. We were like, wow, here we go. We're going into print. So we did a test kind of run with a much smaller book that we could self-fund leading up to that big release. But during that time, I was, there was a paper shortage, right? It was like deepest, darkest COVID. Everything was going on. I had never actually made a book. I had prepared a manuscript for publication, and that was all it was. And so I was learning as we went. And I was advised by an acquaintance of mine who had gone through a Masters of Publishing program here in Canada, had I considered pivoting to satire and poetry until such time as I would have enough books out to get into the federal funding machine, and then I could go back to making craft books like I wanted to. And I thought she was joking. What an absurd thing to recommend to somebody who's starting a craft publishing company. But she was serious. And the reason for that, Joe, is that you nailed it. There is a very robust public funding subsidy machine in Canada for good reason, which is that our population is very spread out and relatively small. And in order for Canadian stories and Canadian culture to survive and make it in print, it requires to some extent support from the public, which is great. But the scheme that we have going on now, as I understand it, was really established through a ton of advocacy from poets and literary fiction publishers in the 70s without really adjusting for 50 years hence. And so, yeah, Canada's a great place to be a poet because it's extremely frictionless for publishers to publish poetry in Canada, which is not to slag poets. It's great to live in a society where poets, have a voice. It's very, very hard to make a living as a poet. But for the rest of us who make, say, popular press trade books that should be able to find an audience enough to support them, the whole system. So this trickles down into the trade organizations. We don't have like private trade organizations here. We have publicly funded trade organizations. There is an organization called the Book Publishers Association of British Columbia. There is also the Association of Canadian Publishers, which runs at a national level. They all receive federal funding. And they all do a tremendous amount of work lobbying the government and advocating to maintain or increase federal funding, which trickles down to the provinces and through them to publishers, but not a lot of focus on like actual business to business relationships, not a lot of focus on professional development or business development, not a lot of focus on networking. And so because there are set standards for when a publisher can access those grants, the publishing groups, the trade organizations cater to people who qualify. And when you're a startup press, you don't qualify. There is no high risk startup fund. There's no, hey, let's help you get off the ground. We want to foster new voices, fresh voices, young voices. And so because of that, you're on your own. I have only just been able to join the Book Publishers Association of BC as anything other than like a friend, which is like an incidental member, but I still am not, I don't qualify to be a voting member. And so what I talk to people about here is that I joined PubWest and then I joined IBPA in the US years ago. I spent 35 seconds filling out a form. I paid my money. I was able to access professional networking. I was able to access professional development. None of that exists here. I'm like, it's like I'm standing outside of a window being like, please help me. I don't want to be a leech. I don't want to just suck you dry. I want to contribute ideas as well. Don't we want that?
Our industry is run by billionaires and conglomerates.
At Microcosm, we wanted the freedom to independently sell our books, easily pay royalties, manage our inventory, and understand our business all in one place.
That's why we've been using our own software since 2001.
Now, we want to share it with you.
Working Lit is the only business success software that is created and owned 100% by publishers for publishers.
Join Working Lit and get the agency you need to help your business grow.
Visit workinglit.com to try it for free.
I'm still not there. The Association of Canadian Publishers has my application on their desk. It's been there since March. I don't know when it will be. And it took me a half an hour to fill out. So it's just kind of a different landscape. People, yeah, it did. It was like a university application. And a lot of the industry here, because the funding is specifically for traditional publishers, a lot of the gating of the community is to keep self-publishers out.
Mhm.
Hybrid publishing here is not considered to be an innovation. It's considered to be a threat. And so a lot of it is maintaining the walls. So while yes, great if you write poetry and apparently satire, according to my friend, to just start a press because you have a passion for making a particular kind of book. It's not really, once we're established, I'm sure it'll become way easier because then I'll be in the flow of how everything works. But I'm trying to remember very hard how much the struggle is or how real the struggle is right now, because I'm determined to get in the door and then be like, look, can we open the door wider? I think that's really important to do. So
Mhm. I love that.
Well, I feel
mean-
like that answer aged our audience 10 years.
sorry,
Because
folks.
It's just you're like one hard dose of reality after it. And thank you for giving it. I
Yep.
do feel like the biggest problem we have is, you're like, how is it going? And people are like, great. And you're like, okay, but how is it going? And then, you're like, what are the impediments to your success? So they're like, none.
Yes.
And then,
Yeah.
so I'm glad, as the former I guess I'm still the vice president of PubWest and for another month. And as a board director of the IBPA, I welcome you to our great organizations. And I guess we will export all of our poets to Canada so they can live like wealthy, happy lives until you completely shutter the doors to all Americans. But I wanted to actually talk about a different topic, which is the fact that what your books really excel at is what the best books excel at, which is like engaging an advanced beginner at the subject matter. So let's say what you are doing rather than what you're not doing. You're rising above the level of information you can find on a AI Google search, and rising above what you'd find in Wikipedia, and rising above what even somebody that pursues and does the craft, and engaging them where they are, which is what a good book does. So why did you make that decision other than the 20 years of experience that you have as a publisher?
I don't know, but I want to take everything you just said and make it our new marketing campaign.
Freebie.
So I think actually a lot of it was driven by frustrations that I've had. I have, as an editor and an acquirer of books now, I absolutely will not publish a book that justifies the existence of the book, which is something that happens all the time in craft. I did it myself. It was expected. Why? You should learn how to crochet. There are so many reasons. No, dude, you just picked up the book. You want to learn how to crochet. I'm not going to, that's 4 pages trying to convince somebody of something they're obviously already interested in. I don't know why we do that. So I think it wasn't this deliberate, like, I'm going to have the strategy of saying, right, I'm going to meet people where they are. I think where that came from is that so many books don't take for granted that people know anything at all, including their own minds. So if somebody's picking up a book because the cover is pretty, they know their own mind and they may say, wow, I want to make something like that. They don't need to be convinced of it when they open up the book and start reading. Those are the pages that get skipped. It's a waste of time and money, frankly. So that's why. And also what I learned was we launched our company in 2020. We didn't release our first book till 2023. We launched with a digital magazine as well, because that's where I come from, but as well because we needed no investment whatsoever in order to do that. We could DIY it, which we did. We invited people to become founding members. So it was a paid publication, but people were enthusiastic about it. We had enough of an audience between the two of us in the craft industry that people trusted us, and they gave us their money before we even published anything. And that was our seed money to get that online publication off the ground. Through doing that, we met a lot of people. And the first people that we published were people we already knew, either through that community or just through the craft industry in general. So I should say, like, whereas the publishing industry in Canada has been very hard for me to break into, we were in the craft industry already. So we had those contacts, and we had people who were Canadian authors who really wanted to publish in Canada. And until we started doing this, they didn't have a clear path. There are some publishers that publish books like ours in Canada, but they also publish a lot of other books. And so for us, we were like a part of the craft community. This is like, right, niche publishing 101. Publish for the people you already are. I am this person, very driven to publish books that I would want. And I'm a serial dabbler. So I'm like a beginner at everything except the few things that I've become really, like, again, I've already picked up this book. Don't waste my time telling me why I picked it up. I already know why I picked it up. And it's usually not one of the kind of cliche reasons they say, right? Like I contain multitudes.
Save the world.
Right? 100%. And so a lot of it came from that. So we had a very good relationship with the people that we were publishing and learned what they wanted to say. And because we were already publishing pieces by them in the online magazine, we knew what resonated. And so we could kind of skip over the whole testing the waters thing. We had already, not deliberately, it was incidentally, we had been testing the waters. We knew that this first author of our first book, Sheep, Shepherd, and Land, had written things for us that people went wild about. Every knitter loves seeing sheep farms. It is like, it just tweaks that little thing in the back of your mind. Like, I know I'm not leaving my corporate job in the city to become a sheep farmer, but it's what I muse about at night when I'm knitting in front of Law and Order, you know, that kind of a thing. And so we were able to say, we don't have to create an audience for this. We know the audience for this exists. And because we also know that audience and are a part of it, we can skip over the, like, let's create a market for this by justifying everything. It was already justified. In my opinion, there can be a fascinating book on the most obscure, strange, niche topic, and people will read it because of the passion and the knowledge of the person who wrote it, and they'll be like, I didn't know. And it doesn't have to be hundreds of millions of people buying that book. It can be a few hundred people buying that book. That can be a viable business proposition. It can be great for the author. It can be great for the publisher. So that's where I came from. I wish that I had the foresight to say, we publish books that meet people where they are. But that is now something that I will completely have in mind because it is where I ended up.
I love that. So speaking of meeting people where they are, when your books tried to meet us in the United States, we had
Is this meet cute? That's what we're doing now.
I mean, the books are really cute and we did eventually get them, but there were some bumps along the way. Do you want to talk about international trade and tariffs and all of that?
Yeah.
What happened?
So I felt very, very grown up and very responsible as a business owner at the end of 2024, where I legit took time on holiday to reflect back on the previous year and plan for the next year. And my plan for 2025, or my goals for 2025 were twofold. One was to establish sales representation in Canada. Sales representation and distribution are decoupled in Canada, unlike in the US. So I had distribution for a while, which meant our books were sitting in a warehouse, but I did not have a team of passionate people going to bookstores saying you should order these books from this warehouse you already have a relationship with. And suddenly at the very end, in December of 2024, that fell in line for me. It was amazing. It was the group that I wanted to work with. So it was like, I started 2025 with one of my two goals met, and the other goal was to access the American market, which of course is like the golden goose for all of Canadians, because we really do have a tenth the size of the population. The American market, you know, the English speaking market is, you know, vastly bigger. And I know the American market because that's where I cut my teeth. And so I was very excited about this. And one day, so you have on your website, and I had identified a long time ago, because of my craft roots, that I wanted to work with you. FYI, this was, I was like, yeah, I learned when SPD kind of went down and you started distributing small presses and picking them out. I was like, these folks speak my language. I speak this language. I spent a lot of time in Portland in crafts over the last 20 years. And I was like, this is, and I don't sell on Amazon. I was like, if I have to rely on Amazon, then I don't want to be doing this work. So I have never done it. Our books are listed there, but they're sold through UTP here in Canada. Anyway, I knew from your website that you consider a small press when they have 5 books out. And I knew that my 5th book would be coming in the fall. As it turns out, my 5th book is coming in the spring because we moved it up, because I know we've avoided this term, but like there's this whole tariff war going on between our countries. And this book is about the wool supply chain in Canada. And the author started getting inundated on social media. Where do I find Canadian made wool yarn? How can I, do this? And I was like, do you think we can rush this book out for the spring? The answer was yes. It's coming out in like 2 weeks, 3 weeks. Yeah, so the true cost of wool. So that has been my spring, has been like, let's crash a book into spring that was scheduled for September. Like I haven't slept in weeks. But then also I asked Joe, I was like, are you even considering taking on new Canadian presses at this time when there's a blanket tariff? Who knows what's happening? There's so much uncertainty. I would not have blamed you if you were like, well, we're going to kind of like throttle new relationships with Canadians right now. Joe came back and told me that, well, actually any tariffs or duty would be on the publisher anyway. So there is actually no risk to you in that regard. And I was like, well, okay. And then you asked me to send you my books, and I did. And you said, well, let's start this kind of trial basis. Let's try wholesaling your books. So FYI, folks, our books are available in the US through Microcosm. Please buy them for your store, your craft shop or your bookstore. People love them. But I had to then get you these books to your 2 warehouses. And this was at the very end of March, leading into the April 2nd deadline, which I can't remember which of the deadlines was going to be Trump's big Liberation Day. I think it might have been April 2nd. They all kind of run together in my mind. And so
by using his language.
I know. Oh, so I was like, okay, it's the end of March. Like I wanted to get them out to you before that deadline, even though as well, I had been advised that books were exempt. The mechanism the tariffs were being collected through meant that books were exempt, but yet still it seemed like anything could change at any moment. And so I don't have export infrastructure. I don't have a relationship with a broker that we work with. I brought 8 boxes of books to the UPS down the street, sent them over the border. I knew they arrived, like they crossed through customs before April 2nd. And it was 2 or 3 weeks later that it was a holiday day here. We have Easter Monday. It's one of the perks of Canada. We have Easter. We have a 4-day weekend at Easter. And I had brunch with one of my authors who was in town, and I casually looked at my email, and there was an email from Joe that said, hey, Kim, see attached. Let me know how you want to proceed. And it was a UPS invoice for $660 US in brokerage fees and tariffs that I had not been expecting. I mean, we all knew, I knew there had been the risk. This was not something completely unexpected, but I was like, that's like a grand Canadian. And I was like, okay, here we go. So I learned how to dispute the charges through UPS. It turned out it was a very straightforward process, but I had also been told that it could take weeks or months for them to resolve this. I learned that UPS is kind of known to erroneously apply duties and tariffs. Sorry, UPS. Many people say it. I did not know that. They were my only choice. Like, whatever, no regrets. And then, like a week or two later, I think, Ellie, you sent me the next invoice for the remaining 2 boxes that had not been tariffed, bringing me up to about $1,400 or $1,500 Canadian in tariffs and fees. Not a bankrupting amount, but we've established I'm operating in the red at the moment, and this was like, oh. And so all of my plans were thrown into disarray. I was like, well, I mean, obviously I was going to pay for this, and, you know, we did. And maybe I just wouldn't send any more books to the US. Like, the risk is just too much for my fragile business right now. Maybe I'm just going to have to make a go of it in Canada alone, or maybe see if I can access the European market or the UK. And then less than 2 weeks after I put in the dispute, UPS was like, yeah, our bad. That was totally our mistake. We're going to reverse the charges, which I've since learned means they have to like send a note to their billing department, which may or may not process it immediately. So now we're in this, like, you know, the fees have been paid and they're due back, and they'll come to you and then you'll send them to me. And in the end, depending on the exchange rate, we'll be flush and it should be fine. And so now I'm back to being like, well, I would really like to work with you and send you more books. And in fact, our book that's coming out in 2 weeks, The True Cost of Wool, is coming to you straight from our printer. So that's the long and the short of it.
Are we going to lesson, like, if we get more tariff bills for books, not to pay them?
Right,
well, we don't.
but,
The trouble is, like, we can't not pay them. They deduct it automatically. If you know, and that was the weirdest thing about yours is yours came in. Yours were delivered to us as past due, even though they have our billing information that they can just bill it. So it was doubly confusing.
No, we changed our UPS plan recently that I think it will catch any future tariffs.
Okay.
Not intentionally on their part at all. But it seems like a bug, but it's a feature for us.
But it was doubly baffling because you're like, well, what if this is why the first time we're hearing of this is when it's past due? That should never be happening.
Yeah. Well, and what
I
I had been advised by a colleague of mine, not in publishing, who deals with this all the time because she's importing all kinds of goods for her business, was that she will dispute the charge, but then immediately phone the billing department and say, like, do not send this to collection. It's in dispute, because the two departments don't talk to each other. So she would start, like, she would have these invoices go to collection while the dispute was taking months to resolve. And so I think in our case, we were lucky. It resolved very quickly and no collection, I guess, was involved, even though you got the invoice past due. I had a real good panic. I'm pretty sure that shaved like 3 to 5 years from my life. But now on the other side of it, I was like, well, like, it's unpredictable. I had lengthy email exchanges with the director of Books BC about this, because I had followed the tariff advice coming from the book industry in Canada, which was to use a different tariff code that was specific to this 1970s exemption versus like the usual like 4901 tariff code for books. Interestingly, on the UPS invoice, it tariffed that other code, inserted the 4901 code and said no tariffs, which was part of the paper trail that confused me terribly, because I was like, so I kind of took screenshots of that line and I sent it to the industry folks. And then I was like, oh, guess what? They just were like, my bad. It was their mistake and they should have been tariffed no matter the code. So I'm just going to use the 4901 code from now on. And
yeah, I think the 4901 code is good. I don't totally understand it. I looked into it when we were going through this and I was like, okay, there's like a sort of sub code that says like Canadian goods exempt, Canadian goods non-exempt. And like, yeah, I feel like maybe they thought you were just trying to like get a weasel around it with the Canadian goods exempt code, but like, who the heck knows? I don't know. We haven't, for what it's worth, we haven't really had a ton of problems shipping things to Canada so long as we use the 4901 code, but once in a while there are. Like, once in a while there's a random bill that a customer gets and they're like, what the hell? And we're like, yeah, we better dispute that.
Yeah.
And
And I mean, and as a Canadian, we're used to this because we order stuff from the US, like as individuals, all the time. Are you going to get nailed with duty? It's a crapshoot.
We built this software from scratch to solve our own problems starting in 2001.
It's not only the reason for our survival, but the reason we've been a Publishers Weekly fastest growing publisher 3 years in a row.
Now we want to share it with you.
Join Working Lit and get back the agency to understand your publishing business, market and sell your books, and painlessly pay royalties.
Working Lit, doing the math for publishers.
Visit workinglit.com to give it a try for free.
This was before like the tariff war. And so I think we're used to it as consumers in Canada because we're importing things from the US. I don't think Americans import from Canada nearly as much. And so it's just, yeah.
And when we do, and this is, I mean, I used to think I knew a lot about this issue. Maybe I did used to know a lot about this issue, but NAFTA like basically evaporated when we import things from Canada. It's like it's Montana or Nebraska, like you pay a higher amount of a freight bill, but we don't have a GST. We don't you just get the stuff and you're like, oh, that was great. And we saved some money because we paid it in Canadian dollars. And now, modern credit card fees are such that you don't even pay an exchange rate. You just save money. And then things like this started happening. We import to our distributor in Canada and we pay import taxes on American-made goods. And then they bill those back to us, so it's the same as you. We don't know what's going to happen until like the pallets go through and they're like, this is how duty was assessed on that. And you're like, seems like a lot though. Are you sure? Do you have somebody doing a check or do we just get stuck with that? And usually the answer is the latter. And so it's a weird one and then, this obviously the last 3 months, like everybody, like the world, who, again, all of this was very unnecessary for anybody playing our home game. They're like, tariffs get you nowhere. The best analogy I've heard is, I am an economics professor and I have a trade deficit with the university that I teach at. They pay me a lot more money than I pay them. My favorite restaurant has a trade deficit with me. I give them all of my money and they give me no money. It's a trade deficit. And you're like, thank you. That actually helped frame this issue a lot more, because you're like, money moves and you're not always going to be in an even exchange of goods and services with other places. It's just how it works. And the whole point of NAFTA and the whole point of all of these trade agreements, like, however, like, let's be honest, are in the United States' favor by and large.
Yeah.
Like, are now
We're
being
designed to be.
framed as to our detriment, because this influx of cheap goods is now being seen as like, these countries selling us all these cheap goods are not buying nearly enough of our expensive goods, which is very, very screwy. So that concludes our economics lecture. Please respond.
I don't think there's any responding.
I got nothing.
Very
Said it
well.
all.
So that, yeah, and it's screwy because, yeah, we get, and I talk to a lot of people, like, we import books from the UK, we import books from other places, we sell books to Australia, we sell books kind of global, well, not kind of globally, we sell books globally, like to some parts of the world that are in less economic distress than others at this time. They tend to buy a little more, but in general, in my conversations with people, everybody I talked to was basically like, there shouldn't be tariffs, but just like pretty much your story too.
Oof. Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. I guess like the TLDR of this is beware. You don't know. Be prepared to wrangle with the bureaucracy, and perhaps.
And that's it. You can wrangle with the bureaucracy, which is a really good lesson to have, right? Like,
Yeah.
this was resolved in our general favor. Like, no harm, no foul in the end. It was just a lot of pain to get there. So you may have the pain. I lost a good several weeks of actually working on making books because I was like trying to take in the fire hose of information and sorting things out, and also just, looking back at it, stressing out as an activity, which is wholly unhealthy and unproductive, but you don't really realize you're in it until suddenly, you have to rejig all of your deadlines because you blew past them all. So,
yeah, and I feel like that is one of the real unaccounted for costs of the current upheaval in the United States government, is that there's so much uncertainty on every level. I know I don't do my best work when I'm sitting there stressing out about what may or may not happen. And I definitely don't do my best work when I'm having to figure out all of these regulations that even the people that made them don't know how to administer them. That's, yeah, I feel I don't know, as somebody who has helped lead an organization that's went through some pretty rapid changes, I've learned a few things about how to do that. And this is not how you do it. You don't just drop the bomb and leave everybody to pick up the pieces. That is bad for morale and it's bad for business. I don't know.
So so let's get it on a positive note. I know,
okay.
I mean, we occasionally do positive.
I appreciate that.
But so you make these books about crafting. Why, and let's also face the facts. There's a lot of craft publishers in the United States. There's even some big, I guess F&W got folded into PRH, so you don't really need to worry about that anymore. Congratulations. But you have these other ones that are you have some independent powerhouses. So why should stores stock your books instead of these other books? Or
well, I would say stock our books in addition to the other books. So part of it is that our books feature Canadian authors. And while there are many Canadian authors that have worked with American publishers, we're coming from a slightly different sensibility, which is interesting. It's not better or worse. It's just a little bit different. So this book that's coming out, The True Cost of Wool, is written by a Canadian sheep farmer and mill operator who is also passionate about changing the entire wool industry in Canada for a lot of reasons you'll learn about in the book. Everything she says about the wool supply chain applies in the US as well, but it's written from a Canadian perspective, which might kind of help illuminate some things. Just like I was talking before about how it's different operating a small press in Canada than it is in the US. In many ways, the US is the Wild West. Everybody's there's so many amazing, super niche presses in the US. And there's an ecosystem that supports that kind of unique niche approach to things in so many ways in small business. In Canada, we don't have that so much, but we can learn a lot from the way things are done in the US, I would hope. And that's part of what my mission is I will talk to anybody about the value of just serving a niche in any way that you do it, because that forms community and that forms engagement. And that is a beautiful cycle in which to do business. In the case of books that are about crafts, the crafts are universal. They're done the same way, maybe with a little bit of variation all across the world. But I'm a knitter and I love reading books about knitting traditions from Northern Europe, which have a rich history. And I may not ever make a shawl in Estonian lace. I would poke my eyes out. Just try. It's so intricate. It's not but I love learning about it. I love reading the books about it, even though I'm not going to make it. So if you're an American and you're curious about what's things north of the border, a book is a great way of dipping your toe into slightly different spellings, a little bit of a different sensibility, and authors you may not hear from otherwise, because until now they didn't have a publisher that they felt was approachable to them. And so in the case of Anna Hunter, the author of this book, this is her second book with us. The first book that she wrote with us is called Sheep, Shepherd, and Land, and it's a beautiful photo journey of sheep farms across Canada. So if you're sitting in your home in Mississippi or Louisiana or Texas, and you're like, oh, I would love to escape into some mildly northern sheep farms, this is a book for you. And that's not a book that would be made in the US because it's about Canadian sheep farms. And so that's what I would say. I would say our books don't replace the craft books that are made in the US, which are amazing and fantastic. And they may or may not justify their existence, but that's just something we craft book publishers have to contend with. But they will add some flavor, some Canadian flavor, shall we say.
I love that. I feel like the US version of that book would be like a gift book with pictures of sheep swearing.
Oh, I love that. Yes. That would probably sell way more because that would be like small format. You could put it right by the till. That's your impulse buy.
Well, there's another for you. Or sheep giving like geopolitical economic commentary. I don't know.
Right, the sheep could explain the tariffs in cartoons.
Whoa.
Oh, whoa.
That's like an American reading level, you know.
Right. Well, we should co-publish something like that. And it would be this like great coming together of our nations to explain this, you know, like we can demonstrate through our friendship, this friendship in publishing that, look at that.
International peacekeeping. I didn't know this podcast was ever going to go to this far.
No. I mean, I feel like we could have a whole diplomatic mission in swearing sheep and how they can bring us together as nations.
It's a good
Sheep
idea.
for president.
Mm-hmm.
One of the sheep needs to call the other ones sheeple.
Yes, that could be their
That's right.
derogatory for
That's right.
people. But I don't know.
That's right.
Would a sheep be self-hating? I guess that's a difficult
I
question.
mean, a person would. I don't know. I feel like we're anthropomorphizing the sheep than they would.
I know. Like we're going too deep into it. I think we're thinking too hard.
Yeah.
Right. This is an American audience after all. See, only I can make that joke. You cannot make that joke.
No, I 100% can't.
Last in like March and April, we actually started to compile like lists of our books that we carry by Canadian authors and then publish by Canadian authors and do like social media marketing around like support Canadian authors, which, you know, normally we do when a country is war torn and troubled. And it did, I don't know, I guess it could still go that way. But
I hope not.
But I do feel like, you know, the kind of like greater awareness of Canada and Canadianness is super interesting and maybe not a bad thing. Like, yeah, let's talk with Canadians. Let's learn what is the Canadian sensibility.
That is a good way to Canadian,
yeah.
Stories, right? In craft publishing, you work a lot with inexperienced authors. Folks who have an idea, but they haven't come up through publishing. They've come up through craft. And I love that. I love working with first-time authors. It's such a deep collaboration, but because of like, it's intimidating to be a first-time author sending your idea to like, right, Penguin Random House. Like that's just bananas. Yeah. Whereas I'm like, let me tell you all of the downsides of working with a small press and then all of the upsides. We've had wonderful support from American readers, right? Especially because we use Kickstarter. Half of our backers are in the US. The first round of Tariffs, so I was beginning to fulfill a Kickstarter on February 1st when like suddenly the hammer dropped for the first time. And I was like, I'm sending like 300 books over the border on Monday. And so I, again, had to stop. I lost my entire Sunday with like friends were coming over. We were going to have pizza. We were going to clean our hands. We were going to pack books. I had to instead figure out how in a non-political way, because I didn't want to upset anybody, be like, hey, Americans, I don't know if this means you're suddenly going to get a duty charge of 25% when your book that you paid for a year ago arrives on your doorstep next week. And what I got was nothing but lovely support. We launched the book at a quilt conference in Phoenix at the end of February. And when people learned we were Canadian, they were incredibly supportive. Like we weren't asking for it. We weren't like, we're Canadian, you know, we were just, and people would be like, I'm so sorry. We wish this weren't happening. And we've seen that all the way through. Now, even folks who pre-ordered The True Cost of Wool, knowing that they were pre-ordering it from us in this climate. Now by the way, we're sitting in Canada now on the cusp of a Canada Post strike. So, you know, again, we're like, right?
Who
We
knows?
support
like,
striking
winning.
workers, but like we also, so I have a whole survey out now to like 300 people who pre-ordered that book. If you chose letter mail shipping, let me know what you want to do. And again, even Americans who may not be aware that a postal strike is looming in Canada are like, yeah, don't worry about it. Hold my book until the strike is over, or I'll pay you, an extra $10 and you can ship it, via another carrier. And like, communication is really key. That relationship that you get to form with your readers is really key, because at times like this that are tumultuous and uncertain, you can just go to them and they know that all of this is happening. And for the most part, they're incredibly supportive. So I do feel that from American readers. Thank you for that. We're keeping it in mind as we plan this next Kickstarter. Like, can we even run it? If I were American, I would feel a little bit hesitant to back a Kickstarter from a country that I know where that final product is coming over a border to me. There's so much that's uncertain. Kickstarter's really working on that and working with their creators on it. But yeah, I don't know. It's tough. It's a tough time. Talk to your friendly neighborhood book publisher. We love to hear from you, especially the small press. I don't think you're going to reach anybody at the huge conglomerates, but the beauty of small presses is that sometimes it's just one person like me. And we love to hear from you. We love to hear what you like about our books, especially, but we also like to hear like what your experience is, how something like touched you that you read from something that we made, what you want to see, especially for a niche publisher. Like, if you're Canadian and you're listening to this, I want to know what you want to see from us, because that will help me go out and find it. But also remember that like books are made by people. It's a beautiful thing about books. They may be assembled and printed by machines, but they're made by people. We are fallible and we are interesting, and we love to connect with people through ideas and the printed word.
Thanks for joining us once again.
Please send your questions to podcast@microcosmpublishing.com so we can answer them on future episodes.
And please give us 5 stars on iTunes and everywhere else that podcasts are reviewed.
You can find us on the internet at microcosm.pub,
On Twitter at microcosm,
on Facebook at Microcosm Publishing,
on Instagram at microcosm_pub.
and here in Portland, Oregon on North Williams Avenue.
Thank you so much.
Have a wonderful week.